Good evening and welcome to the Islanders Reminiscing on North Woolwich and Silvertown, or how I have decided to call this tonight, So You Think You Know North Woolwich and Silvertown. First of all, a big thank you to our sponsors, the Royal Dogs, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and of course the organizers of the Islanders project, the Thames Festival Trust. A big welcome to the members of our panel tonight. Melissa Ford from the Newham History Society, Dave Fennessy from the Silvertown and North Woolwich Past and Present Facebook group, Colleen Sullivan, North Woolwich and Silvertown, born and bred, Alan Godfrey, a former police constable for North Woolwich and Silvertown, so everybody behave. And Colin Grainger, a local historian and author of the very popular blog Royal Dogs Forgotten Stories. So what is going to happen tonight, and why am I calling it So You Think You Know North Woolwich and Silvertown? During the show, I'm going to be showing a lot of photographs, all courtesy of the Newham archives. And I'm going to see how many stories, memories, information, how many things can the members of the panel tell me about each photo. But also I want to challenge you watching live and see how many things you can remember, you know about, memories, family memories, personal memories that you have or you would like to share with all of us of each photograph. So do remember to keep commenting, just using the comment section during the live, and I will be sharing all of your comments and all of your memories and all the information that you too have about these photographs. And let's see how many things we can tell and we can remember about North Woolwich and Silvertown. What is the prize? I was asked just before we started, what is the prize? Well, I have promised something to the members of my panel tonight. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's a bit of a private thing between the five of them and us, but there is a big prize for everybody. And the thing is, the community wins, because all of the stories that we share tonight are going to be kept and preserved and uploaded to the project, The Layers of London. What is The Layers of London? Well, The Layers of London is like a very cool interactive map of London, and you can go to the Layers of London website and you can click anywhere you want, your favorite street, landmark, park, and then a lot of information pops up with the history of the place and of course memories and people's stories. So everything that we share tonight is going to be kept forever for future generations on the Layers of London project, and that is a fantastic win for the community. So if everybody's ready, before we begin, let me play you, of course, Colin, I had to do it. Let me play you a little music video with some of the photographs that we are going to be discussing later tonight. Right. Are you ready, members of the panel, for round one?
Yes.
And are you people watching at home ready? Because I want you to also participate, sending your memories, the information you also have about the place and the events of each photo. And feel also free to send any question that you may have for the members of the panel. People like, for example, Colin, Grainger, or Melissa. They're very, very they historians with a lot of information about the area and about Newham. So if you have any question, I'm sure they will be very, very happy to answer it. So I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's part of the game that you also have to guess what it is from when it is for each photo. And let's go with round one. Colleen, Russell, what is it?
That's Drew Road School.
And what can you tell us about the place?
Well, actually, not as much as I could probably tell you about Story School, because I didn't go to Drew. So the only connection lots of friends did. The only connection I really had was the youth club. I would go to youth club in the evenings. A large Victorian school over lots of floors. I think the boys used to do boxing up on the top floor, while the girls did dancing and things either in the hall or on the stairwell. But no, unfortunately, I didn't have lessons or do any of the out on the. It had an open roof terrace, I believe, but I'm sure somebody else who went there would tell you more about that. But no, my connection was really just the youth club.
Dave, Fennessy, for people who are not very familiar with the area, where is Drew School, or where was located?
Well, it's where London City Airport's entrance is now, if you're coming in from the streets like Savile Road or Leonard Street. So where that entrance is, that's where the school playground was, and it was just behind there. I also didn't go to Drew Road. I went to St Mary and St Edward's, but I came from Silvertown, so that picture's quite interesting because the kids hanging off the bars like monkeys, that's what I had to walk past every morning and every night to go home to school. So they like to intimidate the Catholic kids, but I mean, I wasn't religious. I would have loved to have gone to Drew Road because I would have had a lot more sort of local friends, because the smaller school down the road was seen as, something to attack rather than to get to know.
Colin, Grainger.
Well, I suppose one of the advantage here is that's my school that I went to. And happy memories of lots of things. Probably the one that most people talk about is the fact that all of our pupils adopted the local ships, and we adopted the Glen Line, which is the Glen Olkey, and we got to visit it and often used to look. We had a magnificent view of the docks from the roof, where I probably wouldn't glorify it by saying it was a weather station, but there was a little box built that we managed to get the weather forecast from somehow. But it was fantastic. I spent most of all day long there. Some lunchtimes I'd go home to my grandparents' house, and if my uncle Tom was there, he would bring me back on the handlebars of his bike. And I suppose running races. I remember, I was never very good at long distance running, but I enjoyed sprint runs, and myself and one of the other pupils that Colleen knows very well, Ronnie Armitage, used to vie each other for the running races, and it was about even Stevens. That's all I'm prepared to say. But it was a lot of fun. It was a great upbringing, and another little piece of local history was that we were the first school in what eventually became Newham, when the two boroughs, East Ham and West Ham, combined. We were the first school in the borough to go on a school trip abroad. That was when I was 8, and we went to France. And a date, that's where I had my first taste of red wine, thanks to the school teachers that took us there.
Alan, did the children of Drew School give you a lot of problems when you were patrolling the area? Let Alan answer that. Colin, because you have a best interest. Let Alan answer.
Yes, I used to visit Drew School frequently between 1961 and 1993. The staff there were fantastic. They always welcomed me in. And one of the odd things I noticed is that on the ceiling in one of the main halls was painted the points of the compass. The children in previous years have been made to learn the points of the compass in case they went into the Merchant Navy, and the staff thought it was a good idea. So Drew School was a happy place. If I timed it right, just before school dinner, I could go into the school kitchen and get a nice piece of baked pork tart and a cup of tea. Okay.
Melissa.
I don't really know a lot about Drew School, but I do, if I remember rightly, there's quite a lot of photographs of the road by the side of it, and I'm sure the school is to the right. And I'm sure there's quite a few famous pictures with like just the wall of the school. I could be wrong, and obviously with the docks behind. But that's all I do know about the school, really.
And I'm gonna. It looks like we already have one comment, and it's from Robert Rogers from the Newham History Society as well. And Robert says, at one time there was not a housing office at Silvertown, North Woolwich, so people had to go normally by bus to either East Ham or Stratford to pay the rent. Then a small housing office was put in the shops at Woodman Street. Later, the council decided to do a trail system, so a few of each trade were based at the old Barge House Depot, and I was the sole electrician. I'm not sure this story is connected to Drew School, but Robert, thank you very much for sharing this, because all of the comments as well that will be used as information that we will upload on the Layers of London project. Alan, you wanted to add something else about Drew School?
Yes. When you see the famous pictures of flooding in Silvertown, it's always a picture of children walking about in water in the road just to the left of the school where the houses are, and there's always a big ship in the background with the flood water in the front of the photograph.
So, shall we move to round two?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Ooh. I really wanted to talk about this photo because some of you know I have done some hours, some days of volunteering at the North Woolwich Library, but that's not the building I have been to. Colleen.
Okay, yes, the library. One of my favourite places as a child, but not that one, unfortunately. But that was the original North Woolwich Library that was on the corner of Station Street and, well, Elizabeth Street, what we know now as Woodman Street. And my great-grandparents lived in Glenister Street. So my nan and her brothers and sisters would have used that library. But I think it was probably bomb damaged because that was demolished, I think probably 1940s, 50s. So the first library in North Woolwich that I knew was the temporary one as a result of that one being demolished in Rymell Street. Again, I was very young, so I didn't use that library, but I can recall I've got memories of the building. But for me, the library I used mostly in North Woolwich was the mobile library that came outside Story Street School weekly, I think on Tuesday and Thursday. So almost back to the original place where the original one was. And then that was there till the 70s when the new library was built in Pier Road. But the original library, I think, was gifted by Henleys, the cable manufacturers. Money was put forward, I think, by them for whatever reason, for the locals or whatever. And the library was built from that money that was gifted from the local cable manufacturers in Henley Road.
Alan, I think you seem to also remember what she was saying about who donated the money for the library.
I don't know about donating. I know all listeners to your programme must realise that there were 3 boroughs all meeting in North Woolwich. There was East Ham Borough Council, West Ham Borough Council and Woolwich Borough Council. So Woolwich was south of the Thames, but for historical reasons, Kent, the county of Kent, owned about 500 acres of land on the Essex side. And so therefore, when I first went to North Woolwich, I saw the North Woolwich Library being built in Pier Road, and it was of a different colour brick to the houses on the other side of the road. The other side was in East Ham. The new library was in the old borough of Woolwich. And if you look across to the big blocks of flats, they're all in a different colour brickwork. And I thoroughly enjoyed my visits to North Woolwich New Library. I didn't know the old one.
That's in. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
That's interesting because the original library, apparently, when the money was donated, that was to refurb an old church hall or something in Elizabeth Street that they used to create that library, and the money they spent on books was for reference books, dictionaries, newspapers, magazines. There wasn't actually a lending library. They couldn't go in and choose a non-fiction book. You had to order it, and then that came from Plumstead or Eltham Library next day in delivery. So it was a library. It didn't have. It was mostly reference books.
Yes, and I would add that people living in the old borough of Woolwich on the North Bank, the dust carts would come over from South Woolwich, travel on the ferry, empty their dustbins and take the stuff back to Woolwich on the south side, which was absolutely daft.
I wanted to ask either Dave, Fennessy, Colleen, Grainger or Melissa if through the different research that you have done on local history, you could confirm what Colleen was saying about the old library having been lost, being bombed during the war.
Yeah, Colleen hit it right, a nail on the head there. She's got it perfectly right. Well, the only thing I can add to that is that a lot of people, they mistake where it was. They think that it was on Albert Road, on Station Road, but of course it's an easy mistake to make. Makes me wonder what else is hidden in Elizabeth Street that we don't know about.
Well,
and I was just about sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, Dave, why was it called Station Street? Because that's the site of the original police station.
Yes.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And Melissa, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know that at Newham History Society, in the days when we used to meet, I know that we have mentioned about books, etc. Nothing's come up about North Woolwich Library, but what has been mentioned in the past is Tate and Lyle's, that they had their own social club, and within that social club there was a library, and that has been mentioned quite a few times. More so than the actual library.
Yeah, I mean, my memories are the same as Colin's, really, of going to the mobile library, and you had to order a book from there if it was something you already knew. But I do actually have a book that probably rented out from the old North Woolwich Library, which I'm getting one of my families.
Godfrey.
I don't know what the fine would be. So it's pretty much the same as some of the books from my old school, but not from the old Glasgow grammar. But it's fascinating. And as Dave said, it's because the picture looks like other parts of Albert Road that people see that picture of the library when it's posted on our site, Silvertown or wherever. It's that's in Albert Road, and because it's got the same look as the Tate Institute, hasn't it? In some
yes, that's what I thought it was. So I am also learning something new today. Well, I'm going to learn a lot of things. For example, I'm very keen on learning more about the next place and also about how did it smell.
I think we could do a whole program on that, I think.
Because I think it didn't really smell like a nice soap at all, did it?
No.
Certainly not.
No, I think it was a mixture of all the other industries around it that made it a unique smell.
Of course, we're talking about John Knight soap works. So lots of stories to tell about this, lots of history of the place and the building itself. Who wants to go first?
Someone else? Never mind.
Colin Grainger, tell us what's this building? What did they manufacture, produce, build there?
Well, I was going to say recently I found some pictures of the stables, and you don't really need to say much more than that. From the Historic England website, it produced all manner of things, but primarily soap, I'm guessing, it's most well known for. But as Melissa, I think, said, there were a hell of a lot of different smells in the area, and that was probably amongst the worst. That literally did make you gag. And if the wind was in the right direction, if you had the smell of the slaughterhouse coming from Custom House, that just about put the tin hat on it, I think. But it was obviously, having written about the smells of the area, each place had its own unique smell, and John Knight's was pretty grim, to be honest. But I think Dave's probably more in tune, are you, Dave, with the actual history of other products and stuff like that? Or
not really, no.
Dave, what can you tell us?
To be honest, West Silvertown was somewhere that I went through and didn't get off and just went through to Canning Town. The only reason I used to go to West Silvertown was to get to Charlie the Barber's, who used to have his salon there later on in his career. I always used to make a beeline for that place because he did fantastic haircuts. And there was, dad magazines on his...
There is actually quite a fascinating website on the factory, which was produced by somebody in America, I think, that we found a few years ago, and we put the link on the Silvertown page because it's pictures of all their old horse-drawn vehicles, and then obviously later on the one that you showed, the sort of motorised one. And what came out of it was obviously still being used today, I'm guessing. But
well, if you are watching this show live today, do feel free to send a comment with any information, memories, or questions that you have about John Knight. Colleen, Russell, what else would you tell us about the place?
Well, apart from the soap, I think candles was another thing that they used. But there's something I've always had a little bit of a mystery about this, because I've heard that there was a Primrose Hall that was attached to, was in Knights Road, that was close by, again gifted by one of the knights. I think it was the great grandfather or something, and this was, but I've never seen a picture of this or found out any information. But apparently it was built for the locals, a bit like Henley's provided money for the library in North Woolwich, and Tate's and Lyle's have donated things. It seemed that they often gave something to the community, and this hall apparently had a library and billiards rooms, hot and cold water baths, but I've never seen a photo or found out any more about that. So if anybody knows that would be great.
Well, if you're watching this live and you have more information about this, please let us know. Alan?
Yes. I can tell you, there is a photograph of that hall.
Oh, is there?
Yes, it's in the Newham archives. It's a photograph taken a few hundred yards back up Knights Road, looking towards the tavern, and it's on your left-hand side. I remember that quite well. It was quite a nice social club for the people who work there. But you must ask yourself the question, why on earth is such a smelly industry based there? The answer is the Metropolitan Buildings Act in about the 1880s. They were fed up in London of all these obnoxious industries in London, like tanning, soapworks and all the rest of it. So all those horrible industries, which were important, were chucked out of London, and the boundary, our way, was Bow Creek. So all the obnoxious industries, like John Knight's, came from Wapping over Bow Creek. They found a Thameside site, very cheap, with a railway, all facilities, and they plonked their obnoxious industry there. And it was called rendering. They boiled up bones, meat, dogs from vets, all sorts of stuff. They rendered it into fat, which could be used as lubricant, candles, soap, and all the rest of it. And the manager there, when I knew him, I can't remember his name, sadly, but he looked like Max Bygraves. And he lived in Bradfield Road, and he was a very keen cricketer. And he was going out for a dinner one night, all dressed up in evening dress, and going up to Canning Town with his wife in the car. One of their lorries shed its load of offal right on the middle of the road at Canning Town. He turned the car around after it was smashing of him, went back to the base, alerted some people, got in a bulldozer, went up there and started shoveling up this stuff, dressed in his evening suit, to get it off the roadway. Yeah, it's a very interesting film.
And I can see some comments coming up about your night. For example, Diane says, made playing football in Lyle Park a challenge.
Absolutely.
Because if you're playing football and you need to breathe, and then every time you breathe, you're smelling that beautiful, not like soap smell. Yeah, quite a challenge. Robert says, it was said the attack captain could follow the River Thames not only by the readers and the voice, but also the sights and the smells from the riverside.
Yeah.
And Lorraine says, my dad only ventured to Silvertown for Charlie the Barber too. So Dave, you were not the only one. Got a lovely photo of him somewhere. We'll try to dig it out. Yes, Lorraine, we would love to see that photo. Melissa, anything else we can add about your night that you would like to share with us?
No, not really. I mean, I just really remember the smell of the place. Really, that's the only memories I got, because I lived in Dunlop Point, which was right opposite. And I just remember the smell.
Marieta, can you see that at all? That's inside the stables.
Let me make you big. Can I make you big?
Yeah.
Oh, so that is inside the stables
At John Knight's. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and that's the only photo that we can see without losing an appetite for tonight's dinner, you said.
Indeed, yeah.
Let's
Melissa,
move to... Oh, yes.
Marieta,
Yes.
the name of the man in charge there of the stables was Mr. Strawson, Strawson, Mr. Strawson. There is a photograph of him holding two great big Suffolk punch horses. Once again, I donated that to Newham Archives.
Let's move to photograph.
Sorry.
Yeah, one of my collection.
Yeah.
Well, I have to add that Alan is also here because he's either writing or we all are trying to convince him to write a book of his memories as police in the area. And that book will be a treasure because it will not be only his memories, but Alan took a lot of photos during the years that he was working in North Woolwich and Silvertown. So it's going to be a real treasure when that book is finished. So Alan, keep going because I can't wait to see it. Round number 4. This is King George V dog. Anybody wants to try to guess the decade?
70s?
Yes.
70s?
1973. So how do you guys remember the Royal Dogs around the 70s, just before they closed? Who wants to go first?
Not me, because I was only born in 1970.
I remember
Sorry, go on.
there was an air of like desolation of things winding down and nothing coming along to take its place. So it was a very slow burn kind of desertion for the docks. We just noticed it getting very, very quiet and not a lot of traffic on the streets. and all around was just left to rot, basically. Very sad.
Because the docks closed in 1981. That's when the Royal Docks closed. I have read in different books that they were the last of the Royal Docks, the last of the London docklands to close. Somebody at a previous event said perhaps there was another dock that I don't remember now if it's in Surrey Docks or near the Isle of Dogs. Another dock went on for a bit longer. But anyway, 81 is when they stopped Royal Docks. But yeah, that's one of the questions linked to this photo that I wanted to ask to those of you who grew up in the area, or Alan, who was working at the time. Is it correct to say that 50s and 60s was a bit like a second golden age? And when did you start to feel that there is a decline, that business is slowing, that something is going to happen? Is it the 70s, or was towards the end of the 70s?
No, I think it was early 70s. For me, I can remember you, like Dave said, the demise started then, really. The not so many dockers came out of the gate, the pubs wasn't as busy, the traffic wasn't as bad. Early 70s, and then towards the mid 70s, that's when they started to say, well, you know, what are we going to do with the docks when they close? They knew that it was about to happen, and that's when a lot of the local people and things were started up, like the development corporations to put into place for the regeneration. But sort of early to mid 70s, there were still things going on in the docks, but not as much as the 60s.
In fact, the photo is quite empty. I wasn't sure. I had to check, and it is indeed 1973, but I thought it was late 70s, because there's something about the photo that can tell you it's not as busy as it used to be. It's a place that is not showing the life that it had in the past. Melissa, you said you didn't grow up at the time that the docks were operating, but for somebody like you who grew up a bit later during the decline of the Royal Docks, what did you learn, or what did you hear about the docks? What were the Royal Docks for you?
Well, for me, I grew up in East Ham, South East Ham. So, I mean, I used to get the 101 bus straight down to North Woolwich, and my mum was a play leader in the park. So, so I used to go to the park and that. I mean, going on the 101 bus from East Ham to, through Beckton and into North Woolwich, there was really nothing there. Beckton didn't start growing again until like the mid 1980s. I don't remember much about the docks, except it was a playground for us because it was empty. And, going to school, most of the fathers of my friends were not a part of the dock industry. So to us, it was just an empty place as a playground. It wasn't really much.
That's what I wanted to ask you about your memories, because what's a contrast between Melissa remembering the docks as a place to play, because it was a huge space empty, and Colleen and Colin, who grew up in the area when the area was full of factories, ships, activities. Colleen and Colleen, for you, the docks might have felt it was the center of the world.
Yes.
I mean, as well as growing up with the docks, we used to go fishing there. I don't know why. It was because it was empty and it was water, and we went fishing. And I can remember going night fishing there. I don't remember catching anything, but it was empty and it was derelict. And obviously the Galleons Hotel was the place to go as well, because that was derelict. I've never remember that ever being opened.
Whereas Colin, how do you remember the docks? The docks that, let's remind people, were at the time the biggest and busiest system of enclosed docks in the world. That were one of the biggest ports with more activity in the whole of the universe. So that's a huge difference how Melissa remembers the docks to how Colin and Colleen remember the dog. So I want to hear now from you, Colleen and Colin, who grew up when they were at full steam.
I mean, when that picture was taken, that was my second year at the recorder, and I was a trainee reporter then. But for the next 5 or 6 years, the paper was full of stories of docks disputes, and also the plans weren't really formulated that quickly. And just a few days ago, I was looking at some cuttings, just coincidentally, and it was there's a meeting, there's a dispute, the plans are not very clear, and then we would run literally for the next 7 or 8 years stories about there's a stay of execution for the docks for another year and another year and another year. And then, as Colleen said earlier, the London Dock Development Corporation came along late 70s, early 80s. But it changed physically from when I was at Drew School, and it was, as you said earlier, the busiest port in the world. And that's when the decline started and containerisation came in, and Tilbury Docks became, the centre of the universe, if you like. But it's funny because out of the doom and gloom came things like the Ferry Festival, because people were just fed up and miserable and just wanted something, good in their lives. But the docks did go, as we've said earlier, from being an absolutely massive part of the community to people wondering what the hell was going on. And as the LDDC came in, lots of areas were compulsory purchased. I mean, my own nan's house in Auburn Street, when you look at the houses there now that are in the next street that are still being used, that are absolutely fine, suddenly, the road that backed onto it, Auburn Street, was suddenly demolished as part of, what they called a slum clearance program in those days. And in about, I think it was 77, 78, might have even been 79, we did a feature on the last few people being left in that street. And I deliberately didn't do it myself because I was chief reporter by then, so I sent somebody else. But they just happened to pick my nan and a few locals living in the street, and obviously that's they told their story of what a big part of their lives it had been. So.
And Colleen, what's the difference between the photo as it is nearly empty to a dock that was so full of ships from so many places around the world that I remember at a recent event you told us that at your school you learned geography through looking at the ships, looking at the flag, and talking about where is the ship coming from, or where is the trade coming from, or where is the ship going next. Could you tell us about it a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the 60s, I mean, I lived by the dock wall in Dockland Street, so literally out of our house window, we could see the ships and the cranes, and from early morning till late at night, the noise was, phenomenal, really, of the cranes and unloading and just the sheer volume of people and traffic on the water as well. And then by the 70s, I mean, obviously by then I was a teenager, so I was out and about and not so much in the area. But you certainly, as I say, the decline in the as a child, when the bell went and the gates opened, the dockers would just come out in hundreds. I mean, they just took over the street as they would come down the street. And then by the 70s, there was only few, in fact, they started closing a lot of the gates, and they would only use certain gates for them to go in and out. So, but yes, as a child, like I said, being in Story School, the boats again were right more or less in the playground with you. And the teacher, it was hands-on. The teacher would say, right, what boat have we got in? Let's look at this flag. Let's find the globe. Let's look, where has this come from? What facts can we find out about this country? So, yeah, it was great in the 60s, but by the 70s, obviously, it was the demise was there, and it was dwindling off, really. And that was very sad. And of course, with that, brought mass unemployment. So for all our friends and family worked in the dock. You all knew somebody who worked in there. So suddenly those jobs were gone. And it was very sad, really.
I can see more comments coming up. Alan, let me show these comments. Steve Ham. I think he's talking about when we were talking about the
Knight.
photograph of John Knight, and he's saying closing the windows on a 69 bus as it went by West Silvertown to avoid the smell from John Knight. And going back now to King George V talk, and we were talking about when Melissa grew up and she was doing the journey from East Ham to the Royal Docks, that made Robert remember what is to catch a breacher, and that is nothing like catching a breacher when the 101 on the way to North Woolwich would have to wait as the bridge opened to allow a ship out or in of the docks. It doesn't happen quite often nowadays, but it still happens. And every time that it has happened to me was on a day that I was in a rush. And I have photos of me sitting on the car and the bridge opened. But yeah, it's quite a sight anyway.
But also, what's quite interesting about catching a bridger, when you went from East Ham to North Woolwich, there was actually 2 bridges, so it was even worse catching a double one.
It was a good excuse to be late for school, though, because I went to school in East Ham. So
I'm sorry, teacher, I can't breathe.
I think the bridges don't last as long now, Marieta.
Graham is saying Drew Road School. We were talking about Drew Road School earlier. It was our first round, our first photograph tonight. And Graham says Drew Road School had its own adopted ship. She was called Glenorchy. I think Colin was telling us about it as well. And us kids would go on board for a tour and were treated to tea and cakes. I mean, if I had grown up in the Royal Docks when the docks were operating, I would have dreamt with doing any job that would allow me to travel the world. I mean, what a fantastic place to grow up, the Royal Docks, when the docks were full of steam, and seeing all of those ships and wondering which country is this coming from, which country is the ship going to. Well, it's a very special place that we love. Alan.
Yes, I went there in 1961, and the place was absolutely heaving with dockers and allied workers during the daytime. The cafe opposite the police station served 200 dinners a day to dock workers going in. But I do remember, and I'm sure Colleen and Dave will remember this, on New Year's Eve, all the ships sounded their sirens for about 15 minutes from midnight until 1:15 midnight. A wonderful, wonderful sound.
It was, yes.
I think this lady does not need introductions. I said lady because in Spanish, a factory is a she, and she is Tate and Lyle. And this photo dates back from 1967, but here's a bit of a trivia. This year is the 100th anniversary of the Royal Docks, because that's when King George V, the dock King George V opened in 1921. So that's the completion of the Royal Docks. And it's also the 100th anniversary of Tate and Lyle, because Tate and Lyle opened as Tate and Lyle in 1921. So many things to tell about Tate and Lyle. What did this building, this business mean for the community?
I would say I didn't actually know hardly anyone who worked there, but the social life of it. They had their social club, the amount of dues that I went to. So as a teenager growing up in that area, it was ideal for social.
It was, dances every week, wasn't it, really? And the sporting, lots of sporting events. It had its own sports ground in between North Woolwich and Cyprus. Lots of Christmas parties for the children. I used to go to some great Christmas parties with Pateses. They did wonderful things.
I do remember the social life, but you had to know somebody who worked there to be able to get in.
Not necessarily.
Were you aware that you lived next door to one of the biggest factories, biggest business in Britain?
So I suppose at the time we didn't really take no notice. It was just what you grew up in.
Yes, I think that's symptomatic of a lot of the things, even parts of the docks. You know, we said earlier on about having a dock fence at the end of the street, and you know, we painted some goalposts on it and kicked a ball at it. It was only as the years went by you appreciate the significance, and exactly the same can be said of Tate and Lyle. You know, we went there, we went to kids' parties, and we've unearthed some great pictures on the local Facebook and memories pages over the years. And it was a big part. My auntie worked there, and various other members of the family, in the same way that a lot of my family worked in the docks. And you did take it for granted. There's no question. It was, you're going to get that. And if you were lucky, you might have gone to other parties, Henley as well. And it just was part of your life. And we no question, we took it for granted and didn't realise the significance of it. I probably didn't fully appreciate it until I started working for the paper, because we ended up doing so many stories on it. And again, like the docks, when Tate and Lyle was threatened with closure, and there was huge, there was industrial action, and nationally, dockers got support for their strikes, and Tate and Lyle workers did the same. So it was a massive significance to the community.
And I think, Dave, if anything, you can tell us, or it would be actually very difficult to tell, how many posts and how many photos and how many stories people have posted on the North Woolwich and Silvertown past and present Facebook group only about Tate and Lyle. And that's a sign of how important Tate and Lyle was for the community.
It must have been the biggest local employer. I mean, my uncle Don Watts, who lived in Parker Street, he was a crane driver on the jetty, loading and unloading, whatever. He said that Tate and Lyle's was the best firm he ever worked for, because they paid above the average wage for the area, and they really looked after their staff. If anyone was off sick, you could get a phone call or something, or a little note through the door. Maybe he was making it up, I don't know, but a lot of people that I know who work there said they've never had a job like it, and they wish that they could work for more firms like that.
And also, it would take another show or hours of a show to talk about the Sugar Girls, and we have seen a lot of beautiful archive photos of the ladies working at the factory. It was a big place also for the women of North Woolwich and Silvertown.
Sorry, was that for me?
For any of you. How many women can you remember who worked at Tate and Lyle?
I knew lots.
Oh yeah, they always used to come out in gangs.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of industry down that area that did employ females as well. I mean, you had Cross and Blackwell, where was a lot of females.
Yeah, loaders, just the other side as well.
Yeah.
I can see more comments coming up from people watching live today. Graham says you can actually hear the ship's sirens on New Year's Eve. It's on YouTube. Okay, we'll look that up. Thank you for that, Graham. Because we were talking about the ships before, when we had just seen the photo of King George V dock in 1970s. David says, never forget the ship's horns on New Year's Eve. Always came out into the street for that when I was young. That was a lovely memory. Kevin says, the picture, you can see my old flats and the place I work for 10 years. Happy days. I think he is talking about the picture we were just discussing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Kevin lived in Constant Street, just there. And he worked in Tate's. He was going to work the day we met.
So what happened?
Well, I got on a bus at Stratford, coming home from work, and Kevin was on the bus going to work at North Woolwich. And we said hi, and 45 years later, we're still there.
Does anyone remember a very, very serious fire that occurred at Tate and Lyle's? I think in the 1970s or 80s, there was a massive fire, and the water from the fire hoses was coming out, and it looked like treacle. Everything was on fire inside Tate and Lyle's, and the fireman said it was the worst fire since 1945. Colin Grainger might be able to give us a date on that one.
I can't give you the date, but I do remember it. Yes, it was a very big fire. I think it was a lot of it was quite on the edge of the factory to begin with. And funnily enough, on the Historic England website, where they've got a lot of pictures, they have uploaded, because of COVID, they were in the middle of uploading captions and a picture, but on about 50 of them, I sort of keep looking at it every other day. The pictures haven't been uploaded, and about 5 of them all relate to that accident. So it actually was a major part of history, as you say. And if I can ever get my hands on the Tate and Lyle file from the recorder, which is I managed to salvage, but it's currently in a filing cabinet facing the wall, in a container, which is secret. I'll find out a bit more. So yeah.
And Robert says, Robert from the Newham History Society says, we sweep past what must be the most famous of all the river's industries. Tate's are part of the Tate and Lyle company, opened by Henry Tate, later Sir Henry Tate, in 1877. And as Tate and Lyle in 1921, 100 years ago, it was known as Henry Tate and Sons. Tate's became famous for the production of cube sugar, which became the must-have thing for ladies in the Victorian age at their afternoon tea gatherings. And we were talking about how important Tate was for the community life because of the Tate Institute and all of the social events. And Graham says, I went to all of the children's Christmas parties at Tate and Lyle. Terrific! And Angela says, though when I was growing up in the 50s, a lot of the housing was private rental. Our landlord was Mr. Marsh, who had the shop and post office opposite the station. Which station is she talking about?
I think that's the police station. It's the police station at North Woolwich, I think.
Ah.
There was a Mr. Marsh ran a cycle shop.
Okay. Thank you for that, Angela. And David says, Mum and Dad both work in Lyle's as they lived in West Silvertown before moving down to the Tates and in Park Close. And Mum worked in most of the factories mentioned over the years. Thank you very much for sharing that story. I think there's nobody in North Woolwich and Silvertown who doesn't know anybody who didn't work at Tate and Lyle. I think that's the best way to put it. Let's go to our next photo, round 6. What's that?
Lyle Park.
That's Melissa's one, isn't it, Melissa?
Lyle Park.
Melissa,
No.
go
I've
ahead.
never actually been there.
Really?
No, because when you got from East Ham going to on the 101 bus, you only went to the Royal Gardens, and that was it. And then you got on the ferry, and that was your day out. You had no reason to venture up that end of the road.
Who can explain a bit better for those who don't know the area? Where is this park, Lyle Park?
Well, that's not Lyle Park for a start.
Yes, that is. Yes,
No, it isn't.
Isn't it?
That's Bradfield Road, those houses, and that little playground is on the site of John Knight's Hall.
Ah.
Oh, I thought that was part of Lyle Park.
No,
Yeah, I thought it was a playground in Lyle Park.
no.
It isn't. Dave, Colin, what do you think?
Well, I thought it was the playground in Lyle Park, and just around the corner was the playing field where obviously you used to play Sunday morning football. With our little team called Red Rovers, which was named after the buck ticket that we used to get all over London. And but of course, unlike the kids' football teams today, we didn't all have the same kit. We just wore whatever gear we had. We might have all had one white shorts, I think, at one stage. But as has been mentioned earlier, if the wind was in the wrong direction, it was quite difficult to play. But we had lots of football matches there, and my granddad, who could basically do everything from plumbing to woodworking and fantastic everything, made a replica FA Cup out of wood and put silver foil around it, and that's the cup we played for, which lucky enough we won. But happy memories of the park itself. But I must admit, I did think that was a park, but I'm going to hold back in case Mr. Godfrey is correct. But
So according to my notes, this is Lyle Park in 1986.
Right.
Yeah.
Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was quite a modern playground that they added on at a later date. Lyle Park was always sort of struck me as being in the shadow of the Royal Victoria Gardens, but it had a fantastic bowling, not a bowling green, a putting green. I think it was about sixpence, and you could have about 8 or 10 holes in that. But the only thing that let Lyle Park down was when you walked up to the banks of the Thames, and you could look at some fantastic warehouses in Charlton, or you could look at some fantastic wall to your left, or some boats coming around the corner. But it didn't have the same air as Royal Victoria Gardens. It always looked like a more industrial sort of version. And I mean, I didn't go there that often, but it was nice on the odd occasion. But yeah, it was just the awful view from the riverfront, really. Wasn't that impressive?
I think if you knew how to get it, it's like as it is now. It's got the gates from Hull and Wharf on it, hasn't it? But it's still
That's right, yeah.
people who live there now still find it. Oh, is there a park there? And if you're in North Woolwich, it was quite difficult to get to. But if you went there every week, it's not like Thames Barrier Park is now, where everybody knows where it is. It's still tucked away. I mean, it's amazing. It's still there, to be honest, isn't it? Really.
I think it was again, that was gifted, wasn't it, to West Ham from Lyles's for the local people, for the workers that lived in all the little 2 up, 2 down terraces that didn't have gardens. So Lyles's gifted that land for a park. And it's just like a little hidden gem. It's dwarfed with all the industries. Lots of people didn't even know it was there.
Yeah, I mean, I posted a picture of it from the air the other day. And somebody said, "Oh yes, I remember the bandstand." Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
memory of the bandstand as a kid, but then why would I? But he just went there to play football, basically. It's a bit like
I've read somewhere that Mr. Lyle bought that land to save his competitor Tate buying it.
Oh yeah.
Then he gifted it as a playground for the people, but he didn't to stop his commercial opponents getting hold of it.
So he did it for the community and for his business agenda.
Yes,
I mean, a win-win.
Yes,
we won't complain. I'm showing Angela's comment again because Angela has said, though when I was growing up in the 50s, a lot of the housing was private rental. Our landlord was Mr. Marsh, who had the shop and the post office opposite the station, and we were not sure which station she was talking about. And thank you very much, Angela, for clarifying. It was opposite Silvertown station. So do you guys remember the shop and the post office opposite the station, by the way?
Yeah, it was called Leadbetters in my time.
Yes, and mine.
Because when it was first built, it was the first post office in Silvertown when the station was built. So you got a train station, you got to have a post office as well.
And Robert says there is a break in the industrial landscape as Lyle Park comes into view. The park was financed by the Lyle family and opened in 1924. It is used by the workers at the local companies for a sport of fresh air in their lunch breaks. Thank you very much, Robert. And then Kevin says, because we were discussing whether it is Lyle or not, and Kevin says, looks like Lyle Park to me.
Yeah.
Robert says, in the background is Dunlop and Cranbrook points, which won awards for their designs. Is he talking about? Let me show the photo again. Is he talking about the tall buildings?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. I didn't know that about those buildings. And we go back to the comments. David says it's the part of the park where they had put the green and then the tennis courts. Does it make sense for everybody now?
Yes.
Okay, so I think we now have an agreement on it. It is part of Lyle Park. Let's go to next question, and I got a naughty question for all of you. That is, of course, the does the Sun Lounge in Royal Victoria Gardens. And how many people has had a first kiss there?
Oh, I thought you was putting your hands up then, Dave.
No, I was scratching my head thinking, what? No way. It was they did lovely ice creams up there, and you had like a rectangular cornet, and then they put a little bit of rectangular ice cream in it. And that was quite special because I'd never seen that before.
All of you watching tonight, please do let me know if any of you had a first kiss in the Sun Lounge of the Royal Victoria Gardens. Oh, what do you remember? What memories do you have there? For the historians on the panel today, because I've been in the area, and Royal Victoria Gardens is one of my favorite places, not in Royal Dogs, but in London. And I've got a lot of beautiful memories of the park. And I have also done quite a lot of research on the park, but I have never seen myself that structure that wasn't there when I moved to the area. So can you, the historians on the panel, tell me when did they build it and when did we lose it, when it disappeared?
I don't remember it.
It must have been built in 68 or 69, because I can remember going from school as a class. We were taken there the teacher wanted us was into poetry and wanted us to write poems about the river. We was learning about the river. And that was when I was still at Story. So I left Story in 1969. So I'm guessing that was built 68, 69, because it was relatively new. And I can actually remember my nan was really put out about it. Obviously,
why?
Well, because of being an older person, it was a new structure in Royal Victoria Gardens where she remembered it being Victorian. And she said, it's a monstrosity, it's awful. How are mums and their babies going to get up those stairs, and elderly people going to get up the stairs? And I thought, yeah, perhaps I don't like it. But I can remember the English lesson really well. And we were taken with our books, and we had to look out and write poems about the river or what you could see from the river. And this was compiled into a book. And I just wish we could get our hands on those children's poems back in the 60s of children writing about the river from the Sun Lounge. It was lovely. But yeah, the cafe was like Dave said, you could get a nice ice cream there.
Yeah,
I mean, if you look at it, you can. Sorry, Colin. If you look at it, you can see
Dave,
that.
Go ahead, Dave.
If you look at it, in the harsh light of day, you can see that it's a very basic structure. I liked it because it was fun to climb up the stairs and that, but it always looked to me like it was built from things that was left over from other things.
Yes.
I mean, that viewing platform is pure Minecraft, isn't it, really, when you look at it?
Yeah.
But I think people mostly snogged underneath it rather than went up the stairs and snogged in full view of everybody.
Alan, did you catch anybody doing anything naughty ever there?
I'll just tell you something, about it. I understood that structure was originally put up at Battersea Fair, at one of the Battersea Park festivals they had, and was taken down and was brought to North Woolwich. I don't think it's a very nice, elegant building at all. But that's where I understood it came from.
And Melissa, have you got memories of that site in the park?
I know the park very well. I mean, the best place to go in the park was paddling pool. I don't remember that structure at all. And then obviously the other side of the wall, the sea wall, there was a beach. I remember that.
Did you go down to the beach on during low tide in the summer?
Yep. And we used to swim there as well.
Did you swim?
Yeah, it was great fun. The stairs were basically by the pavilion pub.
I always wonder if you were going to swim on the river at low tide, because I have seen, having lived in the area for a while, and I lived riverside, and even on low tide you could still see sometimes big ships coming up and down the river, and I always wonder, even on low tide, if I would go for walks along the beach on low tide sometimes, but I always thought if I got into the water, it's going to get deep very, very, it's going to be deep very soon, very, very quick, because I mean, few yards from me I can already see a big ship. So how deep was it when you went into the water? Could you just walk into the water with suddenly a big drop?
No, it wasn't like that at all, but it was very dangerous. You shouldn't have been swimming there. The amount of times we got in trouble for doing that, because you didn't realise how much the current was in the water and how close you were to the ferry. But when you're a kid, you don't realise the dangers.
Alan, do you remember when you were a police being called to help with any incident because of children getting in trouble when they were swimming on the river?
No, I do remember an incident at those steps by the Pavilion pub. A man who was somewhat drunk fell off the Woolwich ferry and was being swept downstream, and myself and my colleague ran up the road to the Pavilion pub area. My colleague took his uniform off and dived in, and I said to him, "You are the biggest prat I know of. You never ever dive in the River Thames." He said, "I swam for Essex." I said, "You'll be swimming to your death." Anyway, he swam out, got hold of this bloke who tried to fight him in the water. After a great romantic struggle, the two of them got back. My mate said to me, "Alan, you were right. I was a right prat going in after that bloke." The waters are so dangerous with tide and debris and dirt and filth. And I wouldn't have gone in there. I'd let the bloke drown.
And we got new comments from Robert, and he's talking about the Tate and Lyle photo that we were discussing before. And Robert says, "It is said that Mr. Tate and Mr. Lyle were bitter enemies, and it was their sons who united the two companies." And I think this is also linked to what I think it was Alan who said the real reason Lyle bought the land for the park was so that his enemy wouldn't buy it himself. Angela says, "I have the same memories as Colleen about the dockers when the dock gates were opened. I lived in Savile Road, and round the top in Albert Road there were 2 bus stops. Buses were very frequent at peak time, and in the morning it was impossible to walk up the street as dockers were pouring off the buses and down to the Wicket Gate entrance opposite Leonard Street." Because Colleen was telling us before about the memory of how in the 60s she remembers a lot of dockers coming in and out the area, and how she noticed that something was changing when not a lot of people she could see coming in and out of the docks in the 70s. Lorraine, she's talking now about the Sun Lounge in Royal Victoria Gardens. She says, "We called it the Lookout Tower." Colin Grainger, why are you laughing about the place being called the Lookout Tower?
Well, I'm guessing there was all kinds of mischief going on, probably nicking a cornet without paying for it or something of that ilk. But yeah, obviously, as I said earlier on, it's the way it's constructed, you can be doing various things underneath, and your parents, if they're up the top, they wouldn't know. But
and still nobody's coming forward about, yes, I had my first kiss there. David says, when we swam along there, swam on the beach at that side of the park, near the ferry, we always came when it was low tide to check that no one had chucked any long poles and things that stick in the mud. And David says, I'm visiting. Oh. So I'm visiting. So he's watching it on and off as he just attended the funeral of the president of the Royal British Legion, Silvertown and North Woolwich, John Griffiths, who you all probably remember as the man who organized a Remembrance Day. Well, David, I have to say I didn't know he. I'm really, really sorry. I do remember John Griffiths, and can I just send all my condolences to everybody at the Royal British Legion? That's very, very, very sad news. Yes, we do know John Griffiths. That's really, really sad news. And David says the observation tower in Royal Victoria Gardens was built as a result of the original concrete wall after the Thames barrier. I think that perhaps answers Dave's comment about which material did they use to build it, because it looked like they had built it using something from something else. And again, I am very shocked to hear about John Griffiths. We all know him, as David said, he was the organizer of the Remembrance Days, and yeah, I'm very, very, very sorry for your loss to everybody at the British Legion, North Woolwich and Silvertown branches. Very, 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 very sorry to hear those news. Let's move to the next photograph. The dogs protest. When did this march take place? Did it happen after they closed, or during the 70s leading up to the closure?
I think that was mid-70s, the march. I can remember there was lots of people, local people, demonstrating for ideas to put forward for the closure of the docks. And I would think that would be mid-70s, probably.
Dave, Colin, Grainger, how many stories have you written, researched, shared about the closure of the docks?
I think those pictures were from a march. Obviously, there was a rally in East Ham, but there are some other pictures which have also been posted in the past, quite recent past, of marches through the streets, starting off at North Woolwich. They probably did walk to East Ham, I'm guessing. But it was basically a period at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, as Colleen said, when the LDC came in and were trying to reshape what was going on. And of course, they started over in the Isle of Dogs and that area. And, you know, their view then was to just basically stick up loads of houses and buildings, tower blocks. And then when it came to doing the Newham side, they decided to do some of the transport first, which I think people will agree works better. But problem is, and there are still sites now, as we know, George's Cafe and the pub nearby and what used to be Leverton's, you know, had a compulsory purchase order put on them 20 odd years ago, and they could have been operating all that time because nothing's ever happened to them. So that, I think, those pictures and the banners are reflective of the fact that people wanted to actually, you know, ensure that it became a place to live and work and stay, and, you know, not just become a ghost town, which obviously it did do for quite a few years.
Dave, what would you like to say about those terrible, terrible times?
I must admit, these protests and marches I sort of like wasn't really involved in because I'd moved over to the south of the river by then. But it was good that someone was doing something because the local people really didn't have a voice. And there used to be a really important lady in North Woolwich called Connie Hunt. And she, you know, she managed to galvanise the local community to be their mouthpiece. And to certainly, you know, shove it up a few people's windpipes as to what was going on, because we were a forgotten community. And much like Bill Dunlop in Silvertown, we needed these spokespersons locally to speak up for us because the docks were closing. We didn't know there was an airport coming along, whether that was a good or a bad thing. And I'm sure a lot of people were concerned about their futures and whether they were going to have to leave the area just to carry on living, you know. I imagine it was quite an emotional time for a lot of people.
Colleen, how much things changed when the docks closed?
Oh, I mean, hugely. But as a result of those protests, that was when the People's Plan with Connie and Bill Dunlop and Joe Smythe and Lil Hopes, all those people got together and said, look, if this is what's happening to our area, our community, we've got to have a voice to say what we want and what is needed here. And that's how the People's Plan came about, and then so much came from that. I mean, that was a real community thing. People would knock on your door selling raffle tickets to get money to be able to build this fighting fund to well, I think originally to try to save the docks, but it was beyond safe. I mean, we couldn't do that. But I think they certainly felt that there was a need for the local people to have a say into what was going to happen in the future to their area.
You've said something that I wanted to point out, which is, for me, it's very heartbreaking when I see what they were carrying, saying. So there are two messages here. One message is don't let Easton become a dead end, which I think was the main one, which is whatever happens, something has to happen in the community so the community can continue to thrive. Whereas the other message, our dogs stay okay, that is heartbreaking because that was never going to happen. It wasn't anybody's decision to close the docks. The technology had changed to containers. And the ships were just too big for the docks, and the docks were not big enough and deep enough, and there was nothing that nobody could do to keep the docks open. So it was more about, if we have to close the docks, and nobody could have avoided that because it's the way that technology had changed. They couldn't continue operating for the new ships. Then what do we do now? What do we do with this with the local economy? How can the local economy survive? And how can the local economy survive so the community can survive? Because obviously with the closure of the docks, then the factories closed, the shops closed, the pubs closed. So what was the result of that, Colleen? Do you feel that something good came out of the People's Plan, or was it a long journey through the desert until the moment where we are now?
Well, I think it was a long journey. I mean, I was part of that. I was quite interested in the early bit, in the mid 70s to early 80s with the People's Plan, and was quite involved in that. And it was exciting times in the sense that you felt you was fighting for your community. You had your thoughts, and people worked really hard to try to make a difference. And I think the first bit was, I mean, the veterinary generation came out of that before the actual docks, because I think the introduction of the stole pool really put the mockers on that. Locals didn't want the airport, so that caused another area of thought, really. But yeah, no, it was sad times, but it was exciting as well, because we said, well, if there's this big expanse of water and land, what can we do with it? So it was good.
I think in the 70s it was very difficult for a hell of a lot of people. If you was still part of the dock community, it was tough. But then there was other industries in the area. I mean, my dad worked for Fords, and in the 70s, they were always on strike. They had 3-day week. So it was very hard in the 70s. I mean, if you wasn't hearing that one firm had gone on strike, it was another. So, you had to look after your little community. And as I said before, growing up in the 70s and not really knowing the dock industry. I mean, my granddad was a docker, but, that was back in the 20s, 30s and 40s. But with the new industry in the 70s, and you had like Ford, which was a big employer at that stage, at that time, it was hard for people in the 70s. I mean, I can remember, you know, not just the 3-day week. You had the dustman strike. There was it was a tough time in the 70s, and you didn't see an end to it until like mid 80s.
I mean, by pure coincidence, I had a message from Connie's daughter, Leslie, yesterday, because she's been asked by a guy who's doing his dissertation on the People's Plan and how important it was, and, you know, wanting to speak to as many people as possible. And it's exactly as Melissa and Colin have already said, it was a terrible time. But again, I think in a bizarre way, like the fact that we didn't appreciate things when we were actually living through it, I think the 70s actually changed that a little bit, because when people were actually trying to do something about it, you know, whatever level of success it had, it actually gave you something to cling on to. The fact that the People's Plan was produced was quite remarkable, really, considering you know, it wasn't like the LDDC, who had funding from the government and millions coming out of their pockets. You know, everything to fund that was raised locally, as Colleen said, by people knocking on the door and, you know, selling your raffle tickets. It was like a sort of giant PTA, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
Where everybody came together and wanted to do something. And there's no doubt that some of the ideas were taken on board. And, you know, I don't think we appreciated it. Even working as a journalist, I don't think I appreciated how important the protests were. Especially Ford's, because, you know, Ford's workforce, you know, I think 70% of it came from the Newham area. You know, so when we were running stories on Ford's, you know, the new report came to the office and say, "Why are you writing about Ford's? It's in Dagenham, it's not in Newham." But the workforce had a massive element from Newham, and so did the docks. You know, so it was very tough, which we said before, and it was hard to realise exactly what was going on, and people fighting for their life, really.
And I think we are going to have time for one final picture, because it's so lovely talking to you that I didn't realize we have been doing this for more than an hour. So I might not have time to show all of the photos that I had selected for tonight, but this is not the end of the Islanders project, so stay tuned for more. But I do want to show this one, because I don't know anything about it. So can somebody tell me more about this? The Jubilee Tavern. Is it correct? Is this the Jubilee Tavern?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember the Jubilee Tavern, but not this one. I remember the newer one, which was at the bottom of Dunlop Point and the other block of flats. And it was a strange building, because you had the 2 blocks of flats, and then you had this small low-rise building that it looked like a ramp, and it had garages underneath, and then at one end was the pub. I remember that. And obviously it was right opposite Tate and Lyle's, but this is the original.
Dave or Colleen or Colin, where is this one, the original one? I'm not sure I can place it.
It's off on the North Woolwich Road, along by Knights's, isn't it? Is it on the corner of was it Westwood Road, Dave?
I thought it was Bradford.
That's Boxley
Yeah, it's
Street.
roughly in that area.
It's Boxley Street, junction with North Woolwich Road, isn't it?
Oh, is it as far up as that? Oh, I thought
Yeah,
it was before that. Okay.
And that nice garden in the front is in the grounds of John Knight's Hall.
Right.
I'm trying to look at what year it would be from the cars.
And you can see from the behind the pub, you've got the Spillers flower place, haven't you?
Yeah.
I can answer this question for you, Colin. This is supposed to be the Jubilee Tavern around the early 1960s.
Oh, right.
So yeah, if not about this pub itself, but about the pubs in general. How do you remember either Jubilee Tavern or the pubs in North Woolwich and Silvertown? Because, I mean, being the pubs that served the dockers, I'm sure they were full of life.
They certainly were, yeah. The heart and soul of the community, wasn't they?
I would say more so the pubs at North Woolwich End, because you had the Roundhouse, the California, the Standard. Then you go round into Pier Road. There were several pubs there opposite, like the police station. So you could do a perfectly pub crawl, and it could literally be a crawl.
Yes.
Would you say that Royal Docks was the place in London with more pubs per square meter?
It certainly
No,
was when we
I
did
think
the
that
I've never done the research on
record.
that one, Colin.
there was an awful lot of pub between all along Royal Victoria Dock Road from Canning Town to Custom House. There was like one on every corner. So I think they sort of beat us in some respects, but we've got a running list going on the Facebook group, and so far we've got about 28 or 29 pubs that ever existed from the mid-19th century right up until the current day. That's quite good going for like 2 miles of road.
And of course they were needed, because we were talking about a place where you would have thousands of people coming in and out for work every day. You think of the docks and the factories, and then you think of how many pubs and shops you need to feed and to cater that community, because the community is not only the people living in the community, but those thousands of people coming in and out of the area who might need breakfast or dinner, who might want to go for a drink after working at the ships. And do they have like a special opening hours where they opened early in the morning or late at night, so they could serve the people going into the factories and the shops at every hour of the day?
Yes, some of them opened up about 5:30 in the morning, but in the old Woolwich area, the licensing hours were different to each town. There was a half-hour difference. So at closing time, you could run from one pub over the boundary line into another pub and carry on drinking. But from a police point of view, round at the Oak, in Woodman Street, congregated the prostitutes who were serving the needs of the sailors on board, and invariably Friday, Saturday night there was an almighty punch-up, and the police station used to get full up with drunks, prostitutes and everybody else in the charge room, all fighting one another. It was quite good fun.
And Dave has also joined to say, before my time, so he's talking about the Jubilee Tavern, but I think my dad George, who you all probably know, so I think members of the panel know David's dad, used to sing and play the drums in there. And I think with this lovely memory, we're going to put an end to tonight. A lot of memories that we have shared, and which will be kept in the Layers of London project. And we do have a final very important message from James King, who is leading this project, The Islanders. And he would like to say thank you very much to everybody who participated today, members of the panel, and you watching and commenting live. And it is very, very important that all of you watching, either watching live now or watching later on replay, because the video is going to stay on Facebook for all of you to enjoy later tonight or later during the week. It would be really, really important if you have watched this event, taken part, or you're watching it later, please help us by filling the survey. And he has, we're going to ping the link to the survey on the comments. I think James has already done it. So if you have watched or participated today, please fill the survey so we know more about we can get your feedback on this event. And I just have to say, well, I want to say again, because we didn't know this before we started the show, I wish I had known to prepare something a bit nicer, because he deserves it. My biggest condolences to the family of John Griffith. I'm really, really shocked to hear about the news. John was, again, the president of the North Woolwich and Silvertown local British Legion branch. So really, really sorry to hear about this tragic news. And To Colleen, Dave, Melissa, Alan, and Colin, thank you so very much for being with all of us this evening and sharing your memories, which are a real treasure. Thank you very much. And to all of you watching, thank you for joining this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Right, thank you.
Right.